Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to Living on the Edge. This week we cover a whole range of environmental issues. From a remote village in Bihar where we investigate why increasing numbers of residents are developing serious illnesses, we travel to Bangalore to analyze the benefits of organic farming. We also show you how precious paper really is and how you can reduce its wastage. And finally, in our global problem section, we examine the impact of overfishing. To set the ball rolling, we travel to Jadugoda in Bihar, where India's only uranium mines are situated. Our focus is not on the mines, but on the indiscriminate dumping of waste and the inevitable repercussions on people living nearby. Priya Sumaya investigates the link between possible exposure to radioactivity and the outbreak of serious illnesses in the area.
Jadugoda is a small town in Bihar's East Singhbhum district. Closely guarded, the mines are run by the Uranium Corporation of India, UCIL. The extraction process leaves behind residual waste that is becoming a cause for concern. As you might be aware, uranium is highly radioactive. As a result, it is logical to expect waste disposal to take place with a certain degree of caution. After all, wastewater and debris are more than likely to contain radioactive substances. But when Living on the Edge visited Jadugoda, we found that trucks dumping debris in open areas was not uncommon. This is a tailings pond situated barely a kilometer from several heavily populated villages. It receives wastewater directly from the mines. Once residual sludge settles, the water is drained off. At first glance, this secluded area might seem a safe and harmless way of disposing radioactive waste. But villagers living around it have a worrying story to tell. They claim that during the summer months when the pond is dry, the wind blows dust out of the pond. And during the rains when the pond fills up, there is nothing to stop the water running into the nearby Gotra river.
पानी का बहुत तकलीफ है। यहाँ पर हम लोग लेबोरेटरी में चेक करवाते हैं तो बोलता है ठीक है। हम लोग प्राइवेट में जब लेके गया ना वहाँ पर रेडियोएक्टिविटी मिल गया उनको।
In fact, water and soil tests are carried out regularly by the Health Physics Laboratory of the Bhabha Atomic Energy Research Center. But when Living on the Edge contacted them for their findings, they refused to comment. So we collected soil samples on our own and had them tested independently. It was found that though the radioactive levels were not alarmingly high, they were above normal surrounding levels, and continuous exposure to these levels can have serious consequences. To put it simply, radiation works at two levels. Exposure to very high levels of radiation kills cells, limiting the function of exposed tissues. Nausea and reddening of the skin are some of the symptoms that appear almost immediately. These are the most obvious outward effects. On the other hand, stochastic effects, or effects that are calculated statistically, are more subtle. These occur when radiation levels are not high, but exposure is prolonged. Body cells may not be destroyed, but they get modified. Over time, they may turn cancerous and lead to hereditary disorders. And this is precisely what has scared the local population in Jadugoda. Local journalists and NGOs claim that radioactive dust in the air and water has increased cancer and tuberculosis cases in the area.
It penetrates and it obstructs the genetic code. And once this mutation has taken place, then in following progeny, children, defense mechanism of the body weakens. Now, we cannot definitely deterministically say the causes of high rates of cancer, high rate of leukemia, high rate of mental retardation, severe mental retardation, various types, or even TB, tuberculosis, are not the consequences of the low radiation exposure.
Sadly, villagers are unaware of the dangers of radiation, but they have their suspicions.
हम लोगों का तो ये बगल वाला है ना, हमेशा हर महीना हर दिन बुखार होते रहता है, और ये भी है यहाँ का पानी अगर पीता है ना बकरी सब लूला लंगा पैदा होती है।
भीम माझी का वाइफ डिलीवरी का केस में था, वो मरा ही हुआ पैदा हुआ, पेशाब का रास्ता बांध था और टट्टी का भी रास्ता बांध था।
Substantial number of people are suffering from fatal illness such as cancers, kidney problems, heart, etc. I know 2 or 3 such cases. So one of my teachers expired recently, and the wife of one of my teachers who is now posted at Bombay also is reported to be suffering from cancer.
While it is difficult to establish a direct link between human suffering and possible radiation, the authorities need to accept one irrefutable fact. Radiation is known to have long-term effects on human and animal health. This means that safeguards have to be created and information made public. Instead, all government doctors who have done studies in the area remain secretive about their findings. Living on the Edge received the same response from officials at UCIL, who, while claiming that radiation levels were within limits, refused to say what those limits were or what precautions were being taken.
Whenever we ask the Department of Atomic Energy any question, they say we have never permitted release in the environment beyond permissible limit, but they never state specifically what is that permissible limit.
In fact, no study has ever been made public, though many admit that health, soil and water monitoring is taking place regularly. Whilst it is impossible to ignore legitimate security concerns the government may have, the absence of public discussion will only fuel rumor and speculation and make things worse.
As far as public health is concerned and environment is concerned, I think it is overprotected and secrecy is unnecessary. Now, suppression of data, of scientific information concerning public health and environment is a serious matter.
Perhaps the most worrying facet of radioactivity is that its effects can show up after years, even generations. Will the possibility of a link between uranium mining and abnormally high incidence of disease in the area move the authorities to action? Or will the veil of secrecy that surrounds defense-related establishments prevent the spread of public knowledge and allow possible crippling aberrations to develop?
The green revolution of the 70s pushed chemical fertilizers and high-yielding crops to center stage. This helped boost rural incomes and agricultural output. But 2.5 decades later, it's become clear that many of our agricultural gains were short-lived. With growth dependent on chemical inputs, farming became more and more expensive till only the rich farmers could benefit. Over the past few months, we've received hundreds of letters asking us to examine alternatives to existing techniques. Here, Manira Alva takes a look at organic farming and asks if it's really eco-friendly and whether it can actually replace existing methods.
At first glance, the Green Revolution of the 1970s seemed like the answer to India's problems. Not only did food grain production triple, but the nation also achieved self-sufficiency in food. And the fact that buffer stocks are now enough to meet exigencies created by floods and drought is no small achievement. But the Green Revolution also heralded the advent of expensive chemical inputs that had to be subsidized. It was argued that economic inputs, though high, would be matched by ever-increasing returns. The question is, has the Green Revolution created enough food for all our people?
They say about 30 to 40% are below the poverty line. And this poverty line is something that is 1,500 calories per day or 2,500 calories per day, which is 2 meals a day. So if 30% of our population, which is about 400 million, cannot get that 2 meals a day, what are we trying to talk about in terms of producing more and more in this country?
Vanaja Ramprasad belongs to a small group of people who believe that the answer to our food problem lies in a very simple, eco-friendly technology called organic farming. This implies the use of natural fertilizers like cow dung and urine, organic waste, neem and wood ash. The idea being to use every bit of what one might throw away as garbage. The result, if you do things right, is a nutrient-rich harvest that enriches the land. What is significant is that chemical fertilizers and pesticides have absolutely no role to play on an organic farm.
I just feel that you shouldn't use things like pesticides and fertilizers because they're just involved with using a lot of energy in things like pesticide factories and fertilizers factories, using a lot of wasteful energy to do something that you don't really need and that you can find an alternative to.
Johan Chandy is a former chef from a 5-star hotel. He now has his own farm in Yelahanka outside Bangalore. He echoes the sentiments and convictions of a man who pioneered organic farming in India. With a 5,000 rupee loan from an American friend, Narayana Reddy began an experiment in the 1970s. By trial and error, even while his neighbors were reaping an abundant harvest, Narayana Reddy was perfecting the art of natural farming. 2 decades later, not only is he the wealthiest farmer in his village as far as per acre earnings go, but he has become one of the strongest advocates of organic farming. He describes it as the only option for India, especially after the cut in subsidies is pushing up chemical fertilizer prices.
I am very happy when the 7,000 crores of subsidy was taken away on fertilizers. Many farmers have come down by 4 bags to 3 bags at least.
But why does Narayana Reddy believe that organic farming is the best alternative? To begin with, the investment in chemical nutrients is reduced. Secondly, you can grow a variety of crops. And finally, and most importantly, the land doesn't lose its natural nutrients. In fact, the only drawback we discovered was the need for more manual labor. But in a country like India, that shouldn't be a problem.
In the long run, I feel that just by not using pesticides and not using fertilizers, you're saving a lot of money because they're really expensive things.
ಹೈಬ್ರಿಡ್ ಬೆಳೀತಾ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಟೊಮೊಟೊ ಅಂತ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಹಾಕ್ತೀವಿ ಸರ್ ನಾವು. ಆ ಟೊಮೊಟೊ ಹಾಕಿದಾಗ ಈ ಮದ್ದೊಡ್ದು ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಮದ್ದು ಅದು ಇದು ಹೊಡೆದು ನನ್ನ ಕೈ ಕಾಲೆಲ್ಲ ದುರ್ತು ಬಂದು ಅದನ್ನು ಬಿಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟೆ ನಾನು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಸರಿ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ನಾಟಿ ವ್ಯವಸಾಯ ಬೆಳೆದು ಇವಾಗ ನಾಟಿ ಬೀಜನೇ ನಾಟಿ ತಳಿನೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ.
This is borne out by independent studies. Not only do chemical inputs destroy the natural balance in the soil, but they also contaminate groundwater. And over a period of time, toxic waste is deposited in the fields. A UN study has established that over 10,000 people die every year in developing countries from pesticide poisoning. That's why organic farmers prefer homemade pesticides that have no side effects and are just as effective.
I use a sort of prophylactic neem spray on the fruit, and then just soon after I spray, because the neem spray is sort of oily, I sprinkle neem powder on it again. So that sticks to the fruit and prevents these guys from burrowing in.
Similarly, when you use well-composted manure, there should not be a reason for any diseases and virus diseases. They are totally free from diseases because they grow with all the nutrients they require.
And the growth is more natural because organic farmers have studied their plants and devised their own methods to get the best of their land. For instance, Narayana Reddy uses foul waste and dry leaves as manure, while Johan Chandy prefers wood ash.
I go often onto wood mills and pick up all the decomposing wood from under the wood piles. That, along with the ashes, bone meal and neem cake is about everything I need.
With one cow, it is possible to produce up to 80 tons of manure if we can very sincerely collect all our dung and urine.
Yet, despite all its obvious benefits, organic farming is seen by many as a somewhat high-flown option suitable for highly educated people. Critics argue that organic farming can never achieve the yields of modern agriculture. But this, say organic farmers, is only partially true. It takes at least 3 years after a changeover to natural farming for the results to show. The soil has first to regain its old vitality. This means that chemical use has to be gradually phased out to ensure that farmers don't incur heavy losses.
It's going to take a little time to rehabilitate that land and the practices in that area, and that time lag is what one has to sustain. But it has already been proven by many farmers who have been in organic farming for a sustained period of time that it is possible to grow enough and more than what you would get with chemical inputs.
He can go in a phased manner, like 25% of his total area brought under the organic farm for the first 3 years, then another 25% in the second 3 years. That way, in 10-12 years, even the government can decide a plan for like that, and even the farmers can.
Perhaps, in anticipation of large numbers taking to organic farming, Navadanya, a cooperative farm outside Bangalore, is working on new varieties of seeds. Being developed especially for organic farming, these seeds are expected to be in great demand. And this is not surprising considering the spiraling costs of chemical fertilizers. The challenge perhaps is to spread awareness about natural farming techniques.
So that was the idea in getting to identify what is still existing and to get the farmers to grow them in their own piece of land in the traditional way that they used to conserve them, so that the genetic diversity is maintained as it was in the earlier days.
Strangely enough, Indian agriculture seems to have turned a complete circle. From high-yielding seeds and chemical inputs, the focus is shifting back to natural fertilizers and seeds. Agriculturalists like Narayana Reddy and Johan Chandy are committed organic farmers. But it is only when their experience can be shared by more and more farmers across the country that organic farming will emerge as a viable and eco-friendly option. And yet, it will only be a rediscovery of what our forefathers knew and perfected over time.
Of all the letters we received asking us to do something on organic farming, there were two. One from P.K. Banerjee of Delhi, the other from Geetu Bansal of Bhilai, that were difficult to ignore. Speaking of letters, we received thousands. Viewers want to know what they can do to help protect the environment. Well, to begin with, they can change their attitude to paper once they see Nandini Rajwade's story. For all our viewers, particularly S. Nayak of Belgaum, Karnataka, and P. Dharmadhikari of Jabua, Madhya Pradesh, here's where you come in.
How often do we stop to consider that for every ton of conventional paper, 280 eucalyptus trees are cut down and burnt? That every 5 seconds, forest area the size of a football field is disappearing, and that our consumption of paper in mammoth and wasteful quantities is one of the major reasons for this destruction. You may well argue that it is impractical, if not impossible, to reduce the use of paper, and you may well be right. but there are several ways in which the paper you use can go a little further. Whether it is photostating on both sides or using half-filled notebooks for rough work, seemingly insignificant acts can go a long way in saving paper. By storing waste paper in its original form rather than destroying it, and by selling it to a kabadiwala, India's age-old recycling technique is activated. Besides, producing a ton of paper from discarded paper waste uses less than half the energy and water consumed in the conventional process. It also reduces air pollution by 74%, saves 17 pulp trees, reduces solid waste, and creates 5 times more jobs. Individual restraint perhaps implies a change in attitudes and habits, and yet it is the most significant means of reducing paper use. Whether it is handkerchiefs instead of tissue paper, cloth bags instead of paper ones, or simply organized waste paper collection in a specific area.
So the next time you reach out for a sheet of paper, remember, it is more precious than it looks, as precious as the trees that go into its making, and certainly far too precious to waste. And yet, if used and disposed of properly, it is virtually indestructible, as it can be endlessly recycled.
This week in our Global Problems section, we take a look at overfishing. Not only is it harming the aquatic food chain and decreasing the numbers caught, but it's also destroying the livelihood of smaller fishermen. Manira Alva reports.
The supply of fish in the ocean is not unlimited. As the world population grows, the pressure put on that supply increases. And when the number of fish caught exceeds the capacity of a species to breed and replenish itself, the stock and catch go down. Non-commercial fishing, overfishing, is a problem linked directly to population and poverty issues. Non-commercial fishermen depend on a good catch to feed their families. Yet, if too many adult fish are caught, the fishermen lose their source of income and food. Take Kerala in the 1960s, for instance. The government promoted power trawlers to supplement traditional boats. As a result, in the 1970s, mechanized ships increased their catch by 15%, but overfished to such an extent that small-scale fishermen lost 50% of their catch. Besides, the bottom-sweeping techniques of mechanized boats damage the sea bottom and interrupt sea life involved in the aquatic food chain. It's a vicious cycle as fish populations dwindle. Fishermen on trawlers use fine mesh nets to make up a number what they've lost in fish size. By catching younger and younger fish, the population gets endangered even more. Already, there's an 11% drop in the per capita catch and an increase in prices of most varieties of fish.
Mining is the third largest economic activity in the world and is the single greatest source of toxic emission in the developed world.